It was late summer, and the day had already stretched past its peak. The sun hung low in the sky, turning the distant treetops a dull gold that seemed to settle over everything like dust. I was at the temporary FIRELINE camp, tucked into a clearing where the forest opened just enough for vehicles, tents, and gear. The air was dry, hot in pockets, cooler in others, but there was a tension to it I didn't understand at the time. Not unusual, not alarming, just part of being out here, surrounded by miles of wilderness. The day had been long. Hours of walking along freshly cut fire lines, checking for hazards, inspecting equipment, and keeping an eye out for anything unusual. I was tired in the way you get when your body keeps moving even after your mind wants to stop. My boots were dusty, my hands rough, my shirt clinging in damp patches to my back. By the time I reached the camp, I was following the same routine I always did. Equipment check first: hoses, axes, radios, GPS devices, water supplies. Everything accounted for. Nothing missing. Nothing out of place. The ritual comforted me. It was a small bubble of control in a vast, unpredictable forest. Next came the radio log. A quick check-in with headquarters, confirming location, fire line integrity, and that the perimeter was secure. The signal was patchy in places, the usual static rattling the edges of each transmission. But the system worked. It had to. Communication mattered out here more than anything else. Finally, a simple meal, instant food that barely qualified as dinner, eaten while leaning against the side of a truck, watching the shadows lengthen. Fatigue pressed against me like a weight, dulling senses that would normally be sharp. I didn't notice the small noises at first, the snap of a branch in the distance, the faint whistle of wind through burned-out trees, the occasional rustle of leaves. All of it blended into the background of routine, of work, of exhaustion. By habit, my mind catalogued everything methodically. Checklists, sequences, expected outcomes. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to hold attention beyond the necessary. I leaned back, closed my eyes for a second, felt the sweat and dust on my skin, and allowed the calm of completing the day's work to settle over me. And yet, even in that calm, even in that routine, there was a moment, a subtle shift in the air I didn't notice at first, almost imperceptible. A sound. A pause in the usual rhythm of the forest. Something that didn't demand attention, but once acknowledged, could not be ignored. It was the kind of detail you almost dismiss because it makes no sense. You tell yourself it's just the wind, or a bird, or the settling of old trees. And at first, that's what I did. It didn't interrupt the rhythm of the camp, the checklists, the log, the meal. Everything was ordinary. Everything was controlled. That evening, I had no way of knowing that the pattern of normalcy was about to fracture. That small, almost trivial sound, barely more than a note in the background, was the beginning of something that would stretch the limits of reason and perception. Something that would remind me how fragile a sense of control can be when you're out in the forest, far from the familiar. I packed up my small meal, secured the equipment, double-checked the radio channels, and started toward my tent. The shadows had grown long enough that the sun was a low band of amber through the distant treetops. Everything looked the same as it had for weeks, neat rows of tents, gear stacked carefully, fire lines marked, vehicles lined up. Work focused. Fatigued. Detached. Nothing appeared out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling, faint and fleeting, that someone, or something, was moving just beyond my line of sight. Something following the patterns of the camp, silent and patient, visible only if I allowed my attention to drift from the routine tasks in front of me. I told myself it was nothing. Just exhaustion. A trick of the fading light. The forest had a way of playing these tricks on you. I leaned on that thought, repeating it to myself like a mantra, as I closed the flap of my tent, set my pack down, and sat on the ground to rest. At that point, the FIRELINE camp was exactly as it should be. Everything in order. Everything accounted for. And yet, for reasons I didn't understand at the time, the forest around me felt different. Waiting. Watchful in a way I couldn't see. It was an ordinary late summer evening. Nothing more. But that ordinary evening was about to change. I was sitting on the ground, leaning against my pack, pulling the straps tight to relieve some of the pressure on my shoulders, when I first noticed it. A sound. Light, faint, almost melodic, carried through the thinning canopy of the burned forest. A whistle. Soft. Just a few notes, rising and falling, like someone casually testing the air. At first, I ignored it entirely. I told myself it was the wind. The fire line had burned through so many trees that the trunks now stood hollowed and jagged, and the wind had a way of moving through them to produce strange, almost musical sounds. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on my meal, telling myself that there was nothing unusual here. But the whistle came again. This time, longer. More deliberate. Just a few seconds, repeated once, then nothing. I opened my eyes and scanned the tree line. The burned trees formed a skeletal edge against the fading light. Branches twisted upward, half charred, half living, creating a jagged shadow that stretched across the clearing. Nothing moved. No figure, no animal, nothing. I shrugged. Maybe another crew member. They could be walking along the perimeter of the line, checking stakes or markers. But I didn't hear any footsteps, and no one had mentioned moving to that section. I stood, stretching my back, and glanced around the camp again. The tents were still neatly arranged. Gear untouched. Radios stacked in their cases. Everything in order. I told myself the sound had to be the wind, or some small animal testing the air through the hollow trunks. I went about my routine as if nothing had happened. I checked the equipment again, hoses, axes, GPS units, stacking and restacking where they belonged. Everything made sense, and the normalcy of the tasks grounded me. The sound didn't return immediately. My mind tried to dismiss it completely, filing it away in the same mental cabinet I reserved for minor forest oddities: bird calls at odd hours, a branch snapping without explanation, dust falling from trees. After a few minutes, the whistle returned. This time it was slightly different, softer, almost farther away. A single note, drawn out longer than the first few. It carried with the wind, but I could tell it hadn't moved from where it seemed to come. The way the sound lingered, it didn't follow the pattern of ordinary wind whistling through trees. There was a rhythm to it, a subtle consistency that shouldn't have been there. I paused mid-action, adjusting a strap on my pack, just for a moment, trying to pinpoint it. Nothing. I shook my head and went back to work. No investigation. No calling for the crew. No concern. It was late in the day, I was tired, and there was nothing concrete to react to. The whistle had no face. No form. No explanation. And that was exactly why it didn't bother me at first. I ate another bite of my instant meal, listening with half an ear. The whistle didn't repeat immediately. The forest returned to the usual quiet of late summer evening, rustling leaves, distant calls of birds returning to roost. The occasional snap of a branch under my boots. But I noticed something subtle. Even when the sound disappeared, a tension had threaded itself into the air. The usual ease of movement, of working on routine tasks, felt slightly off. My steps were quieter. My hands more deliberate. My ears more attuned. I told myself it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. It was the end of the shift, just a late whistle carried by the wind. And yet, even as I stacked the last pieces of equipment into the truck and walked toward the small tent I would spend the night in, I could feel the memory of that note lingering in my mind. Soft. Musical. Innocuous. Harmless. Almost welcoming, if I had allowed myself to imagine it. And so I carried on, as I always did, unaware that what I had just heard was not wind. Not another crew member. Not anything explainable at all. It was just there, waiting, just enough to register, just enough to unsettle the edges of routine, and I never stopped to investigate. Because at that moment, everything still appeared normal. Everything still felt under control. But the forest had already begun its quiet work of drawing attention where there should have been none. The whistle returned. It was subtle at first, almost as if the forest itself had decided to resume its casual rhythm. Just a few notes, rising, falling, stretching longer than before. I didn't react immediately. I was still packing up gear, checking lines, making sure everything was in order. But the sound caught me this time. I stopped mid-motion, tilting my head to locate it. It came from the edge of the burned forest, where the charred trunks formed jagged silhouettes against the darkening sky. I waited, listening. The notes stopped. Then, after a pause, they started again, but this time they were slightly different. A variation in timing, a shift in pitch, subtle enough that I couldn't describe it precisely, but obvious enough that my brain noticed. I shook my head. Sound travels weird after fires. Hollow trees, open spaces, wind bouncing unpredictably. That was all it was. There was nothing else. I continued my routine. I had work to do, and I refused to give attention to something that could be explained away so easily. The whistle returned a third time. Later now. The sun had disappeared completely behind the horizon, leaving only the dull amber glow of residual light. My tent flap was secured. The trucks and gear were silent. And I was alone. This time, the notes carried farther. They seemed closer, then farther, then closer again, as if shifting position along the edge of the fire line. My ears strained to locate it, to find the source, but it didn't stay consistent. I told myself it was the wind again. Or a small animal perhaps testing the branches. That was a reasonable explanation. The forest had patterns. The burned trees created strange acoustics. Simple physics. Nothing more. But then it returned, yet again, a fourth time. Each sequence of notes was different from the last. Never the same melody. A few staccato notes now, then a pause, then a long, stretched note that lingered in the air. My stomach sank slightly as I realized the pattern was forming, though I tried to tell myself it wasn't a real pattern. I was alone. Completely alone. The other crew had packed up, left for the nearby camp or the road. Only me and the forest, and that faint, wandering sound. It was always after sunset. Not during the day, not when there was light enough to see the surroundings clearly. Just this low, fading time, when shadows swallowed the burned trunks and everything could hide behind the veil of evening. The whistle moved too. Not erratically, but in ways I couldn't predict. Sometimes near, almost within earshot of my tent. Sometimes farther away, just at the edge of perception. It followed me loosely as I shifted position, moving from equipment to tent, then back to gear, then finally to the small clearing where I intended to sit for the night. I tried to rationalize it again. Sound travels weird after fires. Hollow trunks. Echoes off open ground. A breeze shifting slightly. There was no other explanation that made sense, so I clung to that. But the more it returned, the more I noticed that it only came when I was alone. When another crew member was nearby, it stopped. Not immediately, but gradually. The longer I spent in solitude, the more persistent it became. I tried to stay busy. Checked radios again. Made sure hoses were coiled, axes stacked neatly, markers aligned. Anything to maintain the rhythm of work and ignore the sound. But my attention kept drifting. Always back to the tree lean, to the edge of the burned forest, to that soft, shifting whistle. And the forest remained quiet in every other way. No animals moving. No distant calls. No wind stirring. Just that occasional, unpredictable note, always different, always shifting, always waiting for me to notice. I told myself once more, it's nothing. Just the forest. Just physics. Just a coincidence. And yet, I couldn't shake the awareness that it was following me in the rhythm of the evening, keeping pace with my own isolation. Each time I paused, it paused. Each time I moved, it moved slightly closer or farther, as if timing itself was measured against my steps. It was subtle. Almost gentle. Almost easy to ignore. But I could feel the thread of it stretching across the forest, invisible but undeniably present, marking my solitude, following the pattern of my movement through the empty clearing. And I knew, deep down, that the moment I was truly alone, it would return again. And I would have nowhere to hide. By the time full darkness settled over the camp, the routine had lost its calming effect. I noticed it first with the radio. I keyed the mic the same way I always did, thumb pressing the worn plastic, listening for the familiar burst of static before a response came through. I gave my location. Standard check-in. Nothing urgent. Just confirmation that everything was quiet. Static answered me. Not the usual kind. Not the rough, broken chatter that meant a weak signal but a working line. This was flat. Empty. Like the channel wasn't open at all. I tried again. Same result. I adjusted the antenna, stepped a few feet to the left, then to the right. Sometimes that was all it took. I keyed the mic once more. Dead air. I stared at the radio longer than necessary, waiting for something to come through. A voice. A crackle. Anything to confirm the connection still existed. Nothing did. I clipped the radio back to my vest and told myself it was temporary. Terrain interference. Burned areas messed with signals all the time. I'd dealt with worse. The whistle returned not long after. It came from farther away this time, near the outer edge of the fire line, where the trees thinned into darkness. The notes were slower now. More spaced out. As if whoever, or whatever, was making them had all the time in the world. I stood still, listening. For the first time, I felt the urge to call out. I didn't. Instead, I walked toward the truck where the main radio unit was mounted, keeping my movements measured, controlled. I didn't want to give the sound any reaction it could mirror. The whistle stopped while I walked. That didn't comfort me. I reached the truck, climbed up, and switched on the mounted radio. The screen flickered to life. I tuned to the same channel and spoke again, repeating the check-in. Static. Then, faintly, a voice broke through. Cut up. Distorted. Copy, say again. Relief hit me hard enough that I hadn't realized how tense I'd become until that moment. I repeated myself. There was a pause. Longer than normal. Then my supervisor's voice came through, clearer now, though still edged with interference. Hold on, he said. I waited, gripping the mic. That was when the whistling started again. Closer. Not right at the camp. But close enough that I didn't have to strain to hear it. A low, uneven pattern, drifting between notes in a way that felt deliberate, even if I couldn't explain why. I spoke into the radio without looking away from the tree line. You hearing that? I asked. Silence. Then, very quietly, through the static, my supervisor said, yeah. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to be sure we were talking about the same thing. It's not us, he added. The words landed heavier than they should have. I waited for him to explain. To laugh. To clarify. He didn't. That's not any of our crews, he said again. No one's whistling. The sound stopped abruptly, as if on cue. I scanned the tree line, my eyes tracing the uneven shapes of burned trunks and shadows. There was no movement. No outline. Nothing to focus on. I'll try to get someone out there, he said after a moment. But it won't be tonight. I looked up at the sky. No stars visible yet. Just darkness settling in thick layers. Cell service, he asked. I checked automatically, though I already knew the answer. My phone showed nothing. No bars. No signal. Negative, I said. Another pause. Stay put, he told me. Stick to the camp. Keep the radio on. The line crackled once, then went quiet. Not static. Not interference. Silence. I tried calling back. Once. Twice. Dead air. I lowered the mic slowly and set it down. The camp felt different now. Smaller. More exposed. The circle of light from the truck barely reached the edge of the clearing, leaving the rest of the forest pressed close. The whistle didn't return right away. That almost made it worse. I realized then how completely alone I was. No cell signal. No working radio. No way to leave until morning. The nearest road was miles away, and walking it in the dark through burned terrain wasn't an option. I wasn't afraid. Not exactly. But the sense of control I'd had earlier, the quiet confidence that came from procedures, tools, and backup, was gone. In its place was something thinner. More fragile. I sat on the tailgate of the truck and listened. Minutes passed. Then, from somewhere beyond the fire line, the whistle sounded again. Only once. Low. Soft. And unmistakably closer than before. I had moved closer to the center of the camp, crouched beside one of the larger trucks, trying to keep myself within the weak circle of light cast by the headlights and lanterns. The darkness beyond the fire line was absolute now, thick, impenetrable. The burned trees stretched like blackened sentinels into the night. Then I heard it again. The whistle, soft, deliberate, but unmistakable, coming from inside the fire line itself. Not from the tree line. Not from the outer edges. I froze. Every muscle in my body tense, yet my mind oddly calm, detached. I wasn't panicking. I was watching, listening. Trying to catalog what I was hearing, like a scientist noting an anomaly, trying to find a rational explanation. The whistle came again, closer this time, and I caught movement in the periphery of my vision. A haze rising from smoldering embers, smoke drifting in thin ribbons across the clearing. Behind it, something moved. I couldn't tell what. It was too far, too obscured by the drifting gray smoke and shadows. Just a shape, indistinct, shifting between light and dark. A glint of something metallic, or maybe just a reflection from the truck lights. I tilted my head, squinting. The figure, or whatever it was gone in an instant. I took a careful breath. Tried to convince myself it was smoke and light playing tricks. A shadow shifting as embers burned and died. But the whistling had stopped. And so had all other sounds. The forest, the trucks, the crackle of the dying fire, the faint hum of generators, all of it fell silent. I waited. Every instinct told me to move, to call out, to check the trucks, to make sure no one was inside, to illuminate the haze with a flashlight. But I stayed crouched, perfectly still, listening. Then the whistle returned. Only a single note this time. Long drawn out. Deliberate. And the shape moved again, just behind the smoke, just at the edge of visibility, impossible to focus on. It lingered there, just enough for me to know something was present, yet far enough away that I couldn't make sense of it. I squinted again. No details. Nothing recognizable. Just, movement. I wanted to move closer. I wanted to confront it. But every step I took risked breaking the tension, drawing attention to myself in a place that no longer felt under my control. The smoke shifted. The haze thickened. The movement vanished as quickly as it had appeared. And the whistle was gone. I sat in the faint light of the camp, breath shallow, heart steady, mind racing quietly through explanations, crews, wind, animals, hallucinations. None of them fit perfectly. None of them satisfied the awareness that something had been there, inside the perimeter, moving with intent, listening, watching. The fire line was quiet again. And I knew, with certainty I couldn't name, that it was still there. Morning came slow, gray and thin through the scorched trees. The whistle didn't return after night's final note, but its echo lingered in my mind, threaded through every shadow and every still patch of air in the camp. I packed up my gear mechanically, each movement deliberate, every strap and buckle checked twice. I kept my eyes on the tree line, anticipating something that never appeared, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. I requested reassignment before the shift even officially started. Calm, measured. I told my supervisor I wanted a different post, somewhere with more visibility, somewhere closer to other crews. I didn't go into detail. I didn't mention the whistle. Not explicitly. The shapes in the smoke. The dead radio. Just a quiet, professional request. They didn't press. Everyone knew the forest had a way of affecting people in unexpected ways. Exhaustion and isolation did strange things to the mind. The reassignment was approved without question. I was grateful for that, though I couldn't explain why the relief felt so urgent. Over the next few days, the camp was dismantled. Tents folded, trucks packed, fire lines patrolled one last time. Smoke rose from the remaining embers, thin and gray, drifting across the clearing. The burned forest stretched outward in every direction, silent, patient, unchanged. No incidents were logged. No reports filed. Nothing official existed to mark what had happened, or what had been seen. I returned to other posts in the region, to routine checks and predictable nights, but I never returned to that specific fire line camp alone. I never stayed late past sunset. I never lingered in the haze of smoke. I kept my distance. I walked with others. I kept the radios close, my pack ready, my ears tuned to every sound, but never alone, not after that night. And still, the memory remains. Sometimes, when I'm passing through forests later in the season, I think about that faint whistle. The way it moved. The way the shape appeared just behind the smoke, impossible to focus on. The way the radio went dead, and the forest held its silence. The camp is gone. The tents are gone. The trucks are gone. The fire line has healed over time. But the memory sits there, in the shadows of burned trees, in the quiet spaces between routine checks, waiting. No one knows what happened. No one ever logged it. Nothing official exists. And I still hear it sometimes, if I'm quiet enough, in the far edges of a cleared forest, a soft note, carried by the wind, just at the edge of hearing. The forest doesn't care that the camp is gone. It doesn't care that no one logs incidents. And it doesn't care who is listening.